Bon, nous allons commencer. Merci de vous rapprocher.
So we're going to start. Thank you for joining us closer to the rostrum. Thank you.
Alors,
So,
encore une fois, petit rappel sur les...
again, just a reminder on the speed dating.
16h45.
It'll take place from 4:45 to 6 p.m., I think. We have 10 tables that are right there in the back, and so it's one-to-one interviews. So you need to sign up, please, because for us it'll be easier to manage the flow of exchanges. So you sign up at the desk, no? And so Svetlana, that you heard this morning, Ricardo Umbarco, who is there standing somewhere. Ricardo will be the keynote speaker, and tomorrow, so you have a description of their profiles in the conference documents. Marion Louis Grand, who is somewhere in the room. She works in a digital creation platform. Graziella and Margherita Valletta from Valletta, the cultural capital from 2018, who's here with us. Émilie Petit. Akel, my friend Akel, who's just joined us from Iraq. Oui, does enormous work in very difficult conditions. André Leroux, the very famous André Leroux, who's somewhere. Show your hand, please. There you go. The man is there. And the also as famous Adèle Salini, who's with us. These are internationally renowned activists. And Mohamed Ali Ahmed, I saw him in the back. Yeah, he's there. A young filmmaker from Iraq who represents this new generation of creative people in this country of Iraq. So please sign up. These people want to hear you. They want to talk with you. It'd be sad that nobody goes to them. So conversation 2 is about to start with 2 hard-headed people. Not a very typical path. Monsieur Abdelnawar from Shams Theater in Beirut, the Lebanon, convinced activist, impossible to unstabilize or destabilize. I would qualify him as a bulldozer. You know, that's the best way to describe it. Émilie Petit, she's from Marseille. She's a local, but also from Alexandria, Egypt. She's an artist who does this incredible thing. She does artistic interventions in the streets of Alexandria in Egypt. Not easy, but she does it very well. So the questions we'd like to address to them, both of them, is cultural market or cultural action, how to remain audible while remaining authentic at the same time. So to what extent, to be clear, how you can compromise the word of the artist so that he remains or she remains visible in a landscape that is not always easy to master, full of ambushes and obstacles. So you're both very much involved in the artistic scene, and you're faced with situations that are, to say the least, not easy with the authorities, the media, and so on and so forth. So can you produce artistic creations among 2 or 3 people, and you stay within the circle, and you're absolutely extremely demanding on the quality of the aesthetics of your production? Or will you do your coming out and eventually make a few concessions on the artistic quality? So Abdul, so you can do both, can't you? To start with, so maybe you can, to begin, maybe you can say a few words on what you do, what you've done with Shams over the years, and while you're still here, there. So Shams was founded in 1999 by Roger Asaf and a few artists around him. So the goal, the initial aim was to help young Lebanese artists to stay in Lebanon. to remain in the country. You know, a lot of people wanted to migrate. European dream, the European paradise, the U.S., but mainly Europe. So he gave these people a break and attending workshops in Beirut, things that are not offered in university. University is more academic, and most of the time what they propose is more classical, with no updating. So Shams tried to propose multimedia workshops, all kinds of workshops with new approaches, modern approaches. And the idea was to give these people, these young people, the power to stay in the country and to learn what they want to learn and produce and propose and present their work. It was open to everybody at the time. Mr. Shabab, no, festival for youth, which was really open. You can come, read a poem, dance. So no aesthetic filter and practically no censorship. It was improvisation, so there was no censorship whatsoever. We had an agreement with the official censors. As long as we didn't cross the red line, everything was okay. So you don't have to go too far and insult a person, namely, which echoes the conversation we had with Svetlana this morning. So they can keep their eyes shut and look beyond if it doesn't cross the red line. So, and slowly but surely, this festival grew, and we started with 1 week and ended up with having 5 or 6 weeks, mixed also with guest artists from Europe or other Arab countries. And the mix, that was the most interesting thing, to see European artists taking part in small workshops, meetings, encounters, discussions, exchanges, to understand what was happening on the other scenes and to understand that the dream of this European paradise be considered more realistically. Despite that, unfortunately, a lot of people migrated and left because the situation in the country is such that economically and politically, security-wise, for example, there are always problems, the Lebanon is 33 years up, 3 years down. It's a curve, an ever-ending curve. So, at a point with the youth, we reached a concession. We figured that our approach was really amateur. It's very democratic, not professional. And the people were asking for more professionalism. So we started to organize encounters, music, multimedia, and when we created Rami. Can you say a few words on Rami? Rami is the International Art and Multimedia Encounters, created with Claudine Dussolier from Marseille, from the Zinc at the Friche de Belle de Mai in Marseille. And there was a partnership in Alexandria, the Alexandria Workshop, and we also had a partner in Italy, in Milano. And the idea was to create these multimedia encounters, to create projects. I wanted to have Lebanese and European, mainly French artists collaborating. The French work, the curators, but it wasn't imposed. It wasn't learner and teacher. It was, sharing. There were participants that came from our countries, but also other countries. And so this made things move. At the time, there was no multimedia activity in Beirut, and now there's a lot more that works very well, like everywhere. And now it's rather a platform of encounters where people meet with a newsletter and everything, but we no longer have the means to organize activities as such. And after the multimedia, there was the music, the theater. We did a little bit of video, and we stopped because a lot of structures do that today. So Shams really responds to the needs of the country and to the expectations of the youth, and we take action only if it's needed. If it's not needed, we stop. We've stopped a lot of activities because a lot of people do that in Beirut today. So there's no need in overlapping things, and that's very important for us cultural actors. We also have the same issue at the Friche, especially if you're an incubator. You're not going to be competing with the people that you accept in your incubator. So there are sectors where you have to withdraw. Because there are people that come with products, and you don't want to compete with these people. And little by little, At Shams, we're older, we've gained experience. We're not old, but we've got experience, and this experience enables us to. We got a feedback on our activities, and that's how we can help the youth. We want competition. We need competition. That's interesting. With a view with what Ulrich said, you need competition. Yeah, it's very important, but it's not easy in a country like ours. We sometimes have a democratic approach, quote unquote, where you don't want competition. Everybody has to be treated equally. In the Lebanon, everybody was treated equally. No money for anybody from the state, and so we're looking for money from the foundations, European foundations. That's where we have a little bit of competition. Which Arab foundations? Katan for foundation. FAC, I'm sorry. But FAC is weird because it's a little strange. The money comes from Europe, mainly. Despite the fact it's an Arab association, most people in the associations that grant money in Arab countries, their budget comes from Europe, mostly, or the US. The Ford Foundation, for example, subsidizes a lot of projects. In response to your question, we want to stay authentical. And correspond to what we find in our country. We did a lot of productions at Shams. We knew we wouldn't have an audience, but we did them anyway. When we started multimedia at the beginning, instant video was presented in Beirut, for example. We tried to do Nuit Blanche in Beirut, and there was an enormous audience. It was me and Marc Messier, I think, if I got his name right. Anyway, so this was programmed at 11 p.m. It was an all-nighter, and we hoped that we'd have an audience, but we didn't. But we continued, and we showed all the films. We screened all the films up to 2 in the morning. That goes along with your reputation of a bulldozer. We had to do that. We had to Nekim City is here in the room. Yes, no, she's still with us. So, among others, the production, the theater. There's quite a lot of young people who present proposed texts, and we don't have an artistic committee, So what we do is we rely on the good intentions of the artist, the know-how, capacity, and energy to propose the show. And most of the time, they want to, perform 3 weeks, a month. And what we propose is we say 1 week maximum. Generally, you seldom find people who come up with their show and where they will last for 2 or 3 weeks. No, it's 1 week that we propose, but we give them a chance. We give them their chance. So we don't want to decide in place of the audience. We don't say it's bad. We're not judges. We don't judge on the quality. We let the audience do that. In France, we have a debate, very interesting, on the definition of the audiences, the policies towards the audience. And I think that this situation that is often introduced as being very complicated in Lebanon, but it's a context of great freedom, in fact, because you can decide. It's the audience that decides. That's quite interesting when compared to an approach that is more high level, if you understand. Something high level or artistic excellence. We're always a little bit stuck in this notion of artistic excellence, the audience, the restricted audience. It's a big issue, Hindered. He said it's a hindered audience. Well, that's basically how I translate it. It's imposed. Now, you also have to talk about festivals in Lebanon. There are a lot of festivals that visit Lebanon that actually gather a lot of people. There are festivals with that are expensive, but there's a lot of audience, and the bourgeois, attend these shows because just to be able to say that they went to the show. Being an intellectual is well considered, but at Shams we try to steer clear. We do what we call the Spring Festival. I don't like it, I'm not a fan, but a lot of people do, because it's a festival that brings in foreign artists who sometimes come for the first time in the Arab world. They are known in their own countries, but not in the Arab world. Mostly Africans, yes. It's the initiative of Mohamed Zarachi in partnership with Shams. And so brings a lot of crowds in. A lot of people attend these festivals. But slowly but surely it's losing, or little by little, it's not as popular with the audience. Even if we organize it every 2 years, you have unknown artists that are invited, and people lack interest. The interest, it's like many festivals. At the beginning it works very well, and then you lose the audience loses interest. What we're trying to do this year, for example, is to organize a lot of workshops so that the Lebanese youth is invited to come in, talk to these artists, exchange, so that it's not just a passive audience that you're targeting. But you're staying in a place where, you're in a region in France where you have the greatest number of summer festivals. So the notion of festivalization of culture is very strong here. I organized a festival on the island of Frioul, just off the coast of Marseille. So it's interesting to see that in the Lebanon there's no cultural policy, but there are a lot of festivals. Because it's prestigious. Baalbek is a high repute festival, and those who come to these festivals, organize these festivals, they collect a lot of money, and they say it's not culture. They say it's tourism. So it's the Ministry of Tourism which subsidizes this festival. It's not the Ministry of Culture. It's pure tourism, in fact. So before handing over the floor to Emily, I'd like to pay a tribute to your courage, because you spent a few years in Quebec, in Montreal, and nothing forced you to go back to Lebanon. So a lot of things forced me to go back to Lebanon, but not everybody would have done that. So Emily, quite an interesting path. You're from Marseille and Alexandria, Egypt. You're an artist. And please explain what you're doing here, what you do here in Egypt. Good afternoon. Yes, not a typical path, especially with the Nassim Arax Festival in Alexandria. So I could even say that, as a comment to what you just said, we had no intention of organizing a festival in Alexandria, and this is part of the constraints imposed or the compromises we had to accept on how we define our own projects so they can exist on a given territory. So at start, this festival is called now the Festival of Choreography, Multidisciplinary Choreographic Creation in Public Spaces. Whoa! So every year we change the baseline of our festival. Something that would correspond to what we do and that is understandable by the audience eventually. So we changed the name and we called the choreographic ballad in the streets of Alexandria. Then we called ourselves the Contemporary Dance Festival in Public Spaces, multidisciplinary, pluridisciplinary choreographies in urban spaces. It could be. So, but what do you do exactly? What's important in this project is that, first of all, it's a project that was started with people who had this need to express themselves. So it was generated in Alexandria with people from civil society and institutional instances that got together to try to have a better understanding of urban events. For how long? We're working on the 6th edition right now. That's scheduled for April, I think, in May. Very important, this notion of time. In 2011, there was an opportunity, a window after the spring of 2011, that enabled us to better use the public space and enabled us to launch this project on which we were working for 2 years. And unfortunately, it was stopped. Why? Because of censorship, barriers of all sorts. Well, there were several different things that formed barriers. In 2011, 2012, we could organize in those days, propose a show, a creation in a so-called public space, for example, here on the terraces of the villa outside. About 4 years later, this had become very complicated to organize. In reply to the first questions, what's atypical in this project is that it was born in Alexandria, and for needs of structural to develop a structure, we decided to found an association in Marseille to be able to produce and organize the festival from Marseille. So it's not was not intended to be a cooperation. No, we came from Alexandria to Marseille to make things easier. And then what's not typical in our project, and what is specific, a singularity of the project, is that it's a creation festival. And so our great challenge, biggest challenge, is to establish a relationship between an artist and a given territory of the city. And you change every year. Yeah, we change locations, we change artists, we change projects every year. And each year we propose between 5 and 8 creations that give rise to performances, more public performances and so on. But for us, the festival time is the entire process, coexistence in the city. So the mobility or the relationship with other territories, is that important in your scheme, or is that something working in a closed environment? Or is it essential to have contacts with other colleagues in other regions of the world? Oh, it's absolutely essential. At Nassim El Raqs, you bring in people. It's not only Egyptian artists that perform. No. We ensure that the moment of the festival is turned into an experience laboratory for young Egyptian artists, something that will help them have access to new experiences, and that this is done in relationship with artists from the world over, as far as possible, but with a strong relation with the international scene, and with ensuring that there are transmission of experiences, i.e. Workshops that you organize during the festival. Yes, we invite foreign artists, sometimes to do creations, but also working in collaboration with Egyptian artists, and also work on creations that we try to then propose internationally, Marseille or elsewhere. Creations that we adapt with the intention that this laboratory is turned into a moment of dialogue and exchange of experiences for everybody. Would you say, both of you, Abdo, that the pressure is stronger today with institutions on the price to pay to be visible, or than 10 years ago? Today, do you really have to negotiate with powerful people, private or public? Or is there still a space where you have freedom? There's a small slot, in fact, but it has to fit in with the criteria, i.e. most of the foundations that give us money. Who imposes the criteria? Well, it starts with very high criteria, like, for example, human rights. You have to, prove that art can help serve the cause of human rights. And how can you prove that? Well, on stage, you have to say, well, I'm with you. I'm for the human rights. So the idea is not to say that you will work on specific topics that's in the Charter of Human Rights. No, it's rather, doing arts is already an action, but you have to negotiate, endlessly negotiate. Most of the foundations have an agent that negotiates with us, and this agent changes every 3 or 4 years. Most of the time, it's someone who comes from a completely different environment. And the time that he understands what we're trying to do, well, it's too late. He's gone. We have to start over all over. And sometimes they change the criteria because it's linked with a specific policy of the government. So every time you have to change, and things are not improving. Things are becoming harder and harder. There are more and more criteria in Lebanon. Today, you have to work with the Syrians. And so we did it before it was imposed on us. Even before it started in Syria, we already had relationships with Syrians. And today it's become like, they don't say directly, but they always ask, what are you doing with the Syrians? What's happening with the Syrians? So and this is starting to be bothersome when it's imposed on you. And the Syrians don't like it either. The artists Syrians don't like to hear that it's imposed on them. So it's we naturally work together, but when it becomes imposed on us, well, it's different. Especially when the teams are selected, imposed on us again. So it's not cool, but we managed nevertheless. Emilie, surprising with the image that we have of the, let's say, hardening of the policies in Egypt, to imagine, it's difficult to imagine that you can still manage to organize a contemporary dance festival in the streets with an audience from the streets. Things becoming harder? Is it easier? How do you manage to negotiate all this? I know Alexandria, I visit Alexandria every year, and I'm astonished that you managed to organize these events in the streets. Well, I'll tell you, it's the same for us. How does it work with the police? Do you have to get an authorization or just go and do it? And no. I think we got to the stage where in the festival, for me, it would be out of the question to put artists, the audience at risk. No way we would do that. In 2011, 2013, we managed to make a few interventionist operations where we didn't have an authorization or we were turned down, but we did it. But we don't have a problem with the audience. Obviously, we work in the streets, so in areas that are highly visible, sometimes less visible, but since we've started with visible areas, well, then people follow us. So sometimes we start an evening with 30, 40 people on the street corner, and then as we move from proposition to proposition, we move around the city. And something that's very important for us is to walk together, to move towards artistic proposals. And it's happened to us to start with 30 to 40 people and then end up with 500 people following us, walking along with us. And the artists were totally lost in the audience flow. You told me the story of the army with the monument to the dead. No, I need to say a word of introduction on that. We have plenty of anecdotes on this, but so to avoid putting anybody at risk, and especially since the end of 2013, since the installation of the new regime, no, you can't work in the public area without having an official authorization. That's very strict. But what's complicated is to know who you ask for authorizations. There are many security services, the army, the police, the army police, the police army, and not to mention the people who are on their own territories and with whom you need to work to start with. Before getting official authorizations, you have to ask the district, the head of district, for example, for the authorization, or even the storekeepers, the local merchants or their families. So there's a lot of field work that's very long. And once you've agreed on the fact that this territory is ready to welcome an artist in residence, and this artist wants to work on this territory, then we start looking for authorizations. Working at getting authorization. Since 2014, we've been in relation with the Department of Tourism of the Governorate of Alexandria, which supports our festival with this idea that maybe one day this festival will attract tourists again in a cultural framework in Alexandria. So we're not the only people they support, but they have, there's a serious issue with tourism in Egypt. And so they think that with this kind of international events, maybe tourists will come back and exchanges with the rest of the world will improve. And they help us identify the authorities that we need to approach to formulate our demands. And since 2015, they take care of the administrative processes. So we get our authorizations faster, and generally we get a green light. Because since 2014, each time we had an artistic proposal, we had a plan A, plan B, plan C. So for one given evening, we had the potential plan A, which plan B would lead to plan A. I don't understand. But anyway, we had to readjust our proposals, and then up to 2 hours before the event, we didn't know where the show would take place. So we had no problem with the residencies. If we decided to have a residency at the train station, for example, everything went well, the creation worked well. And once you have an audience coming in, especially foreign audiences, it's a contradiction, but if you have potentially Europeans or a foreign audience showing up at an event along with the press and the media, well then problem, and they withdrew the authorizations. All this to say that we led this partnership convention with the services of the governorate, which helps us today to get the okay, and now we become accomplices in a way. We work together. We really are in a phase where we can negotiate, and so this anecdote of the Monument to the Dead was an artistic proposal from Karima Mansour, who played in the Mimi Festival, and she asked us to. She really wanted to propose her performance in front of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Alexandria. So that's the symbol of soldiers killed at war. And she wanted to do her show there. And we said, Karima, come on, it's impossible to have an authorization for this location. It'll take months and we'll fail. So she said, well, let's try. So we gave it a try. And there's also something that's so strange in Egypt is that maybe in Lebanon it's the same, but everything becomes really hard. You think things will be impossible, and then, well, somehow more difficult it looks like, the easiest it gets to the contours are very fuzzy. And finally, we got the authorization to play in front of the Monument to the Dead, or the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And so in the studio, we worked on Karima's proposal, and then her proposal was we had two young French women dressed in army clothes, ranger shoes, army shoes, really dressed as a military. And I saw the rehearsal and I said, uh-oh, we're in trouble. We'll never be able to show this in front of the Unknown Soldier tomb. But we've done so much work to get the authorization to perform there. So we thought, not knowing what to do, I went back to the services of the government and I said, okay, here it is. I have a slight problem because I think the artistic proposal, we could think that some people could feel this or receive this as being very provocative. So I don't want to censor the artist, but I'm not convinced by this proposal. So as a person in charge of the festival, I don't want to in any way be considered as provocative. So I said, what do you think? Okay, what do you think? And they said, well, if you think that this work should be supported, it's very important to support it. We have don't have any overlook on the artistic proposals that you make. We don't want to intervene on the artistic content of your proposals. If you think it could generate a scandal or something, change places. But if you want to continue and propose your show, do it. Your performance in Egypt, wow. Okay, and so what was the final decision? Well, we moved the performance elsewhere, but that was my decision.
So this is very interesting. So there's a bit of self-censorship then. Yes, absolutely, yes. Self-censorship. I think it's what you've told us is very interesting. We're really right in getting our hands dirty here and talking about freedom of expression. This is very interesting. Thank you very much. We'll take some questions now from the audience. I'm sure people have plenty of questions. Who has the microphone, the bearer of the mic? Here we are. Wonderful. Thank you. I'd like to... Cécile? Mariano. From the Regional Council of PACA. I manage cultural projects for the Mediterranean region, and I work with the Roberto Cimetta Fund, in particular to organize these days. My question for Emily is, to what extent do you think, how much do you think it helps being a foreigner when you're negotiating with the administration in Egypt? I think maybe if it was just Egyptians, it wouldn't be possible. So maybe the fact that you talk about tourism and you're talking about promoting a festival which could be potentially a tourism attraction, perhaps that makes it more credible for the authorities. To what extent does that help? With the question of mobility, not just the fact that you're a foreigner, but also the fact that the structure is based in Marseille. Because these setups, the non-Egyptian structure is able to do things that an Egyptian organization wouldn't be able to do. I'd like to react to this because also we have the question also for the financial backers who would support a project for international cooperation. Sometimes when you have well-known artists from France and Europe who travel to this festival, this also helps to improve the image on both sides of the Mediterranean. In fact, on the initiative of the festival, there were 4 of us. There were 2 French people, 2 Egyptians, 2 men and 2 women. We had a French woman, an Egyptian man, and a French man. And for the first 3 years, when there were just 4 of us, we sent the person who was most likely to be able to use their nationality in the negotiation and their gender as well, in each case. Today, it's, of course, the authorizations we obtain through the tourism department of Alexandria is because I talk to them. But if I'm talking to them, it's because our 2 Egyptian colleagues, one went to London and the other went to Berlin, and they were talking with the secret services and with the army beforehand, and so as a French woman I couldn't start to do that kind of work. That's how I've found the workaround solution of going to the tourism service. I thought, well, thinks the fact of being a French woman doesn't work there, maybe it should work with another service. And so over the last 4 years we've been working in that way. In other words, sometimes it's something that makes things easier, and sometimes, on the contrary, it's very problematic. And so, depending on the situation, we adapt. And in the same way as where previously we were supported by a local organization, which started to be in difficulty. We set up an organization in Marseille, working in cooperation, in co-production for the last 2 years. Now the local organization has such problems that I am now entirely responsible for the whole festival with our Marseille structure. But in fact, we adapt to the situation in each case. Isn't this a problem, or shouldn't you demand that you want to be an Egyptian organization in an Egyptian context? I'm not making any criticism here. Well, yes, you're right. We can see overall what's happening to the Egyptian organization over the last 3 months. The offices have been closed for security reasons. The publishing houses are being closed. People are being arrested. Basically, anybody working for an association is in great difficulty. There are very few of them, and they're all in difficulty. If they're not an association, but they're working as a business, they are starting to have problems too. And overall, the only people who are allowed to work are working with associations in Europe. And you are going to be able to resist for a long time. The Vel de Caf Festival has a structure in Europe. The people we work with in most cases have small local organizations, enable them to carry out administrative tasks locally, but most of the work is done with Europe. This duplicates all the work we have to do because we have 2 organizations the whole time, and also is an extra barrier to development. Because apart from political issues which lead to financial problems, as you said earlier, where we are in a system of complete break with financial backers who want to support projects for 1 or 2 years but don't want to be with us for the long term. They have agendas that are more to do with a one-shot or a single event rather than a permanent support. And so, in addition to that, we have to manage several structures, one foot in Egypt and one in France or elsewhere in Europe. So it creates a lot of barriers to our development. Is this Stalin Maladin studio? Yes, they have a structure in Sweden, I believe. Yes, they don't work with us. In fact, we work with another organization in Sweden. It's Tamassi. There's a Tamassi center. We work with them. There are 11 of us. Can you tell us what the Tamassi is a little bit? I know what it is, but can you explain? Tamassi is a company, it's a business. There are 11 associations who own this company from Egypt, Palestine and Lebanon. And so this enables us to set up projects in our own countries, especially in Egypt and in Palestine too. In Jordan and Lebanon, they don't have so many problems, but in Egypt, they have a lot of problems to develop projects, and in Palestine too. And so Tamassi is a Swedish business, is that right? Yes, right, a Swedish company. And this enables us to ask the Swedish government for money to enable us to operate. This is something they've already done in the past, and I think it was an idea from the Mastic Institute originally. Yes, it's a way of getting around these difficulties. Yes, these are workaround solutions for getting around these barriers. Here you have great know-how in setting up. I think you should set up some workshops for setting up these kinds of solutions. I'm sure a lot of people who would be very interested to find out exactly how you do that in order to benefit from it too. Maybe have some more questions from the audience. At the back there. Mehdi, could you introduce yourself? Mehdi Azdem from the Arazim Association. I'm a project coordinator and I have a PhD in research based in Casablanca. I have a question for Emily. Earlier you were talking about authorizations. Could you give us some more details about these documents? Because in Morocco it's very complicated. We don't know whether we need to ask for an authorization or an information letter. Earlier we were talking about censorship this morning. In Morocco, the censorship is quite moderate when you submit an application for authorization. This is the basis on which we are censored or not. In other words, we have an acknowledgement, a receipt of the document after that, and if there's a problem, they tell us we haven't given you our approval. So could you explain us a little more how this works? Well, the famous document is something I've never seen. I've always worked with verbal agreements. That's an important thing to point out. Okay, that's interesting. And sometimes I was very worried. I thought, for example, some of you were there at the time, at the end of the last edition in 2015 of our festival. We had a ban on our closing event, and they said, no, you can't be there. You've been working there for 3 weeks already, and you can't have your closing event there. We'd been working with the Ex Nihilo company from Marseille. It was very important for us. We put in a lot of money and work into this residency. There were 2 Moroccan dancers from Casablanca. It was a partnership with the Aja Space who were there with us. For the dancers, it was impossible for them not to perform. And so in the end, we had a big emergency meeting on the pavement. And we said, okay, if we're being banned, maybe we can cross over, adapt and improvise the material we've been working on for 3 weeks and do it on the pavement opposite. And then they said yes. Okay. So there was a huge number of police in civilian clothes who were there. The Egyptian team hid in the car. They didn't dare come out of the car during the performance, and all of a sudden it was a kind of intuitive decision taken on the spur of the moment, on the pavement, by 2 organisers of the festival and Al-Batar, the artistic director of the dance company. We didn't really have time to make a proper decision. We were carried away by the enthusiasm of the 4 dancers who wanted to perform. And we wanted to do that because we'd had a fantastic festival lasting 3 weeks. So that's what happened. So in that case, and did the police intervene? No, they watched us. They filmed the audience, of course. They filmed the audience. And they came to see us every couple of minutes to say, is it going to end soon? When's it finishing? When's it finishing? Every 2 minutes. So we did have to shorten the performance a little bit. But apart from that, everything was okay. So that's just to say that despite months of requests and many administrative negotiations, we never had an official document saying you are authorized to do this in that place with these people. So that's very important. But we did have the authorization. What is the authorization? It means you've done all of the administrative work with the passports. Yeah, at the moment we're sending the passports of all of our guests for April and May this year to the security services who will carry out investigations on all of the people involved. And of course, depending on the nationality of the passport, the investigations can be quite long, and sometimes the conclusions are a rejection. Sometimes we've been inviting Algerians or Syrians or Palestinians. It's unthinkable to get an authorization for a Palestinian dancer for them to dance in Egypt, for example. That's not going to happen. So we continue to make the request, hoping that one day perhaps it will be possible, because sometimes unexpected things happen, a little bit by mistake sometimes. It gets through the net. Yes, that's right. Sometimes the incredible things we've done we never thought we'd been able to do before, and very easy, simple things have been very, very complicated. And because everything's changing all the time, by the time we've understood how it works, the system then changes, the government changes, the governor changes, and sometimes, quite honestly, we just have to play it by feeling. There is a lot of work getting authorizations for the people to come, and then there is a lot of work for authorization to do the creative work on the territory, and that is done with the police to make sure people don't get arrested while they're creating the event. And the performance. And then there's the army as well. Depending on the territories, sometimes the territories are controlled by different ministries and different police stations, etc., in the different neighborhoods. Each place has its own specific process for requesting authorization, and we've been learning to do this, and we have to do it when we become interested in performing in a certain place. Sometimes it takes 3 years. In other words, the organization of the event is a work of art in itself. Yes. I don't like to be presented so much as an artist, because for the moment, for me, I'm always writing rather than actually producing anything. It's true that writing the festival and creating the festival on paper is a great deal of work in itself. That's right. Christine, maybe a comment. Very ceremony from the resource company. We're a Swiss foundation and we support projects of stimulation in the Arab countries. I'm very pleased to hear what you have to say, because we've been working in Egypt, and from what you've been telling us, this resonates with what we've been hearing from our partners. We have with Mahatnat. It's interesting that you've been talking about intuition and improvisation, because a lot of things are decided on that kind of level. I'd just like to go back a little bit. In January 2011, there was a wonderful moment in Egypt when art and creativity were presented in public all of the time. When you walked in the street, you'd see young people with graffiti on the wall and painting on the ground, on the walls, on the buildings, people dancing. For a whole year, we saw art being poured into the streets of Cairo and being expressed on the walls of Cairo, even in tourist sites. And that was a wonderful time in Cairo. And then very quickly, this time ended. This time, especially when the army took over, they started to repaint the walls, and then people started to paint the graffiti on the walls again, and then they repainted the walls again and put writing on the wall to say that it was forbidden to write on the wall. So it was a war of painting, yes. So this is when certain artistic and cultural organizations were created, particularly Pratat, which function on the basis of improvisation and intuition. And the fact that they could suddenly organize an event in a public space, such as the Rue Damna Street or the Tahrir Square, in a place where Egyptians go for administrative reasons. And so these performances are taking place. So whether it's the police or the army, these events and performances took place. When I listen to what you're saying, it seems to be diminishing. The situation seems to be becoming harder. I was in Egypt in 2014, and then from what you say, it seems to be becoming more and more difficult to work in Egypt. I have the opposite impression. When I listen to Emily, I get the feeling that they won't be able to stop her. No way. Yes, absolutely. I'd like to know, you did say there are several organizations who've had to close down, particularly the different venues have had to close down over the last 3 months. Are you able to form a kind of coalition, or are you in constant contact, all of you together, to move forward in the cultural level? Careful with the mics hidden in the ceilings here. No, I'm not worried. I've already said lots of things that will condemn me. Yes, the coalition. In Alexandria, we're very lucky in that we all work together. I can't say the same thing about Cairo, because there is a bit of competition in Cairo, not the one type of competition we were talking about earlier, the question of territory exactly, which are more important in Cairo, because some people have made more progress than others, some people are better structured than others. But in Alexandria, there are a few organizers trying to do things, and we need to work with each other. When somebody gets arrested in Alexandria, they call that La Scène, the stage, because it's 12 people who are recreating the world in the bars every evening. But these people called La Scène, the sign of good health. Whenever somebody's in difficulty, the whole community is attacked. And when one person makes progress, the whole of the community moves forward as well. There are a few festivals in Alexandria. We have a festival for creation in public space. There's a great music festival called El Fouki. There's a theatre festival, a political theatre festival, and we try to work with each other to create a kind of a cultural season in Alexandria. We borrow each other's equipment. We publish articles about each other. We do work a great deal together. What about in Beirut? What happens there? Well, in Beirut, we always seem to be working together against the government. When the government threatens us for any reason, we are all work in solidarity. Earlier, we were talking about the problems with passports of performers. We put these problems on Facebook and we publicize it, and that means the next day they have to give the passport back if they've confiscated it. So it's true that we're in competition all the time, but at the same time, we can count on each other. So there's some solidarity, yes. But it's not very visible, to be frank. When I go to Beirut, I don't see much solidarity. But everything concerning performance and theatre, there are several big theatres, Mono Medina and another one. The theatres borrow each other's equipment, there's no problem at all. We're in competition sometimes when we want to organise different festivals, but nobody is going to stop anybody else from working. And also there are some territories we don't work in. For example, we know that somebody has a festival in a particular area, particular neighbourhood. So they are in charge of that. If we want to do something, we always try to do it in partnership with them in their neighbourhood, because we're all in contact with each other. There's no point duplicating what somebody else has done already. They know the right people to contact to get the authorizations from the city authorities, and the same way that person will come and see us when they want to work in our neighbourhood as well. So there's always this kind of exchange. When people come from abroad, each person has their own contacts and we can all work together. I'd like Marseille to be like Beirut as well. That would be good. Here, it's not the same thing at all. Any other questions? Then have one or two more questions and then we'll stop. Any more questions after that? Yes? Claudine, please. My name is Didier, programmer of the Tangiers Festival. We are in Lyon, so we have an association in Lyon and another in Tangiers, similar to yourself. For us, it's the opposite. We thought we wanted to be in the Moroccan territory for some of our administrative work. So we have a Franco-Moroccan team at the moment, some in Morocco, some in France. I wanted to ask how you obtain financial support outside the foundation, because the foundation is one thing, but there are the institutions too. I expect your problems are worse even than we have in Morocco, because we have problems contacting Moroccan administrations. I'd like to know whether you have any private funding that you're able to obtain. For us, the money comes from European foundations or American foundations. We have some very limited local resources, which is the admission fees, which is about 3 or 4%, and then we also get money from specific projects from the Lebanese state, but very, very small amounts. Otherwise, we have private players such as sponsors. Sometimes we get some money, but again, that's very limited. We can't count on that. Above all, we count on the money coming from the foreign foundations. Why is this limited, the private money? Well, the money they put in most of the time is just for a question of prestige. It gives them a good image. And there's no tax credit. They can't deduct it from their taxes. The law, there was supposed to be a law being introduced to make this deductible for them, but it hasn't happened yet. The Ministry of the Culture divided the money democratically between everybody, so we get the same amount as a club in a village in the middle of the country, organising meals for the local people. It's democratic in principle, so it means we don't get very much money at all. Are you hopeful that these private sector partnerships and these sponsors might be able to play a greater role and support artistic work more in the future? We have that hope, but we need to develop it little by little. Is it in the next generation, maybe? We are trying to persuade them not only to do prestigious events, to finance prestigious events. if, for example, if we get $50,000 from the Audi Bank, for example, they do that because it's in a prestigious place and their very rich customers come to that festival. For us, when we work with our people from the poorer neighborhoods, they're not very interested in financing that because it's not their customers who are going to the event. Maybe it's something that will change in the future, but it's something we have to work on over the long term. Emily, what about that question? For us, the financial support is something we have to reinvent every day. We have to reinvent the financing structure every year. We have a financial department who have to work on a one-shot basis or will provide support for 1 or 2 years maximum. So our financial backers have a very short-term approach. So every year we have to think, how are we going to finance this year's festival? So in the first year we used one foundation, in the second year we used the European Union, in the third year we used another foundation. Now we're ending up to our 6th year, and we're starting to get to the end. We've exhausted the local resources. There's no vision to provide long-term support for these kinds of projects with a local anchorage for all of the cultural centres, such as the Institut Français or the Goethe Institute or the Swedish Institute, etc. Their objectives are to increase their local cultural influence. So, for example, they can support us for 1 year to bring an artist from Germany who will be a headlining act. But that's not the kind of thing that will help us structure the festival in the long term. And we, in the first 2 years, they were offering it artists as we took them, or that we didn't. So now we are in a trap of a system. We were in a trap which was a bit of a sterile system. It's the same thing here a little bit. It's not just in Alexandria. It happens a lot everywhere. Claudine, and then we'll stop. Sorry, Jamina, next time. Claudine Dussolier. I wanted to add something to what Emily has been saying, and Abdou has been saying about the question of public spaces and professional development in Egypt. I think after what we call the revolutions, there was a strong demand from artists about the question of performing in public spaces with their concern to foster links with the local population. And I think the revolution in Egypt and Tunisia and elsewhere gave a boost to a number of initiatives, which also led to increased professional competence of a lot of structures. Over the last 4 years, they've been able to benefit, nevertheless, despite all the difficulties. They've been able to benefit from experience, and they are now in a situation where they are more autonomous and are able to look more confidently to the future. But it's a question of the current events does make the question of performance in public spaces rather worrying. For example, in Egypt, it would be nice to see how the Iqdikaf festival will take place, in order to better get an idea of the risks and of the limits that, and the need for a new strategy. In last October in Alexandria, for example, a number of operators, including the Simrax network and people from Cairo and Backstreet and elsewhere, they met to talk about the question of the relationship between freedom and expression in the public space today, and asking what kind of strategy should be adopted in places which, for security reasons, are difficult. In other words, how to organize events without putting anybody in danger because of the religious fundamentalists, and on the other hand, how to defend freedom of expression and to be able to intervene in the public space without being censored. So it's these questions that are important and which are very relevant to Egyptian organizations and are being considered by the Ministry of Tourism that Emily mentioned. And in that perspective, there is an initiative that Matat is taking for next November, which is to organize a kind of collaborative, collective workshop lasting 3 days with a number of different operators from the Arab and Egyptian world and also from the Mediterranean to be able to share and write down together a whole series of elements and political elements and practical elements about the experience that has been acquired in the Arab world, whether it's in Lebanon or Tunisia or in Egypt, of course, and in Morocco too, in order to be able to successfully organize events in the public space. So I think it's very important to be aware that people from different countries, our different colleagues, are very proactive and are not just in relations with France, but also with other European countries and outside Europe as well. Thank you, Claudine. Diaba? And then we'll stop there. Thank you. My name is Jabassa. I'm from Senegal. I run the Africa Fête Festival. I'm thinking we're rather capricious in Senegal because when I hear everything here today, we're very lucky in Senegal. We're a bit spoilt. We've been organizing our festival for 15 years. It's a label that's existed for more than 30 years. We get the authorizations and we get an official document. And we don't need to spend several months to get it. When we ask for the authorization, they say it's too early. You don't need to apply for it too early, only 2 weeks ahead. And we get the authorization 5 days before. The authorization goes through several different services. And we also get authorizations from the police and the firefighters, who are very pleased to work with us and to go to our shows, because they come to our shows, they dance with us, they don't have much work. And so it's the same here in the Free Hall as well. Everybody dances. That's why I'm a bit sad to hear about your experience in Egypt. Because in Senegal, we're still complaining, of course. Yes, here in France too as well, more than in Senegal. Another thing I would like to say concerning often foreign companies try to obtain authorizations in Senegal. That can create a blockage because you're white and therefore you have to pay. For example, if a Senegal person gets the authorization, they get it free of charge. But if you are white, that has an effect. You have to pay. That can be a blockage as well. Adabir, I know you very well. I know Senegal very well. It's not that easy to get authorizations. There is some corruption as well. You don't get authorizations automatically. There is a bit of negotiation that goes on and a bit of control as well. Yes, it's true, but for our festival, Africa Fête, we haven't had any problem. But if you're talking more generally in other areas, then there are subsidies, and to obtain them, you have to pay a little something extra, another 10%. So corruption does exist. It's true everywhere. And certainly for us in the cultural field, up to now, we haven't been asked to pay. As I'm just talking about Africa Fête, our own festival. We'll talk about that later tomorrow. You'll be on a panel tomorrow. You can tell us about what happened with the EU and the money that has to be given back as well. That's very interesting as well. It's not very positive, but it's very interesting nonetheless. I wanted to say something about public space. I wanted to add, if you're talking about the notion of public space, it's a bit different. if you talk about Senegal and Arab or Muslim countries, then you can talk about capital and equipment. There's everything that takes place in public spaces. Senegal is a secular country, as Marcel has said. They're 98% Muslims, 2% of Catholics, 100% of other animists. So public space isn't treated in the same way. What causes a problem for us is Islam. It's the collective control, and that's why you have to work in the long term. And with these new modern forms of control, there's a control of freedom of expression and freedom of creation. So it's the idea of public space itself, which is different between Senegal and Alexandria. In Alexandria, people are raped in the public space. Thank you, Mario. We'll stop there. You'll be able to say something later on. We'll have a little coffee break. We're running late again. And we'll be back again in quarter of an hour for our last discussion. Quarter of an hour is plenty to have some coffee and to enroll for the speed dating. Thank you very much, everyone.